There's a major shift happening right now, and most people haven't caught it yet. We're halfway through April, and something has already moved in a way you need to be aware of. There was just a massive energy update. This isn't about overthinking or trying to figure everything out immediately. It's about realizing that something has already started, and if you ignore it, you may feel out of sync with what's happening next. You're not just noticing changes, you're feeling them hit instantly. One moment you feel clear, confident, locked in, like everything is finally making sense. Then out of nowhere, that certainty drops. Not slowly, not gradually, it just disappears. And now you're questioning things you were just sure about. The gap between how fast things are shifting and how fast you can emotionally adjust to them is creating pressure. That's why everything feels more intense than it should. Small situations feel bigger. Simple thoughts spiral faster. Moments that normally wouldn't affect you suddenly carry weight. But here's what most people are missing. You're not behind. You're just experiencing the impact as it happens. What's really throwing people off right now isn't just how fast things are moving, it's how unpredictable the direction has become. Situations that look like they're going wrong don't stay that way for long. Something starts off frustrating, confusing, or even disappointing. And just when you think you understand where it's heading, it flips. Out of nowhere, it opens a better outcome, or it reveals something you didn't see at first. And just as quickly, the opposite happens too. Things that seem solid, promising, or finally working can shift just as fast and lose their momentum without warning. That back and forth is what creates the pressure. You're trying to make sense of things based on how they look in the moment, but the moment doesn't hold its shape long enough anymore. What feels like a setback can turn into an advantage within hours. What feels like progress can suddenly lose relevance just as quickly. You're not misreading your life, it's just not staying in one direction long enough to read it the old way. That's why reacting too quickly right now creates more confusion than clarity, because the first version of what you're seeing is rarely the final version. There's something else happening underneath this. It's not just random reversals, it's like things are being tested for how stable they actually are. Weak situations don't hold. Strong ones don't need time to prove themselves anymore. They just reveal it instantly. And that's why you're seeing both sides so quickly. What used to take weeks to reveal itself is now showing you the truth almost immediately. But this speed doesn't just affect situations, it starts affecting how you move through them. Because the same thing that's causing these sudden shifts externally is also starting to show up in your own behavior in a way that's even harder to ignore. You've probably noticed this without fully understanding it yet. You get a sudden wave of motivation. It feels real, focused, like you finally locked into something. You start thinking about it seriously, maybe even take action, and for a moment it feels like this is it. This is what you're going to stick with. And then just as quickly as it came, it's gone. Not because you got distracted, not because you're lazy, but because something in you just doesn't connect to it anymore. That's the part that confuses people. Because in the past, losing interest meant something was wrong. You weren't disciplined enough, you didn't push hard enough, you gave up too early. But this doesn't feel like giving up. It feels more like your attention just refuses to stay where it doesn't fully align. It's not that you can't stay consistent, it's that certain things can't hold your consistency anymore. That's why it feels so abrupt. You're not gradually losing interest, you're disconnecting instantly. One moment you're fully in it, the next, it feels irrelevant, almost like it was never meant to go further. And this process is happening in real time, which means the frustration isn't really about starting and stopping. And now, it's time for today's comment of the day. Your next move matters more than your last mistake. There's something freeing about that. A lot of people get stuck replaying what went wrong, analyzing it, carrying it, letting it define their momentum. But this shifts the focus forward. You can't change the last move, but you're in full control of the next one. And sometimes, one good decision can outweigh a dozen past mistakes. That's where progress really happens, not in perfection, but in what you choose to do next. Thank you for sharing this. One of the more subtle things people are noticing right now has nothing to do with big life changes or dramatic moments. It's showing up in something much more ordinary: your rhythm. Sleep doesn't feel completely off, but it's not as steady as it used to be either. You might find yourself waking up at times you normally wouldn't, or going to bed feeling fine and then randomly being wide awake in the middle of the night for no clear reason. Not restless, not anxious, just awake. And the strange part is, it doesn't feel like something is wrong. It's not that heavy, frustrating kind of insomnia where you're tossing and turning. It's lighter than that. You wake up and your mind is active, but not overwhelmed. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's just aware, almost like your system is adjusting to a slightly different rhythm without fully settling into it yet. Then, the next day, you're functional. Maybe a little off, maybe slightly out of sync, but not exhausted enough to think it's a real problem. That's what makes it easy to ignore. But when you zoom out, it's happening just enough to notice a pattern. Your timing feels shifted, not broken, just not perfectly aligned with how it used to be. It's not that your sleep is disturbed, it's that your rhythm isn't locking into the same patterns anymore. And that matters more than it seems. Because your routine, when you sleep, when you feel alert, when your mind is active, has always been tied to how stable things feel overall. When your internal state shifts, your rhythm adjusts with it, even if it's subtle. And if you try to force it back into the old pattern too aggressively, that's when it starts to feel frustrating. For a long time, a lot of people adapted in a way they didn't fully realize. You learn to keep things controlled, not in an obvious way, but internally. You stopped expecting too much. You stopped getting too attached to outcomes. You kept your goals reasonable, your hopes measured, your desires slightly toned down. And it made sense. Because wanting something strongly, especially when things feel uncertain, can feel risky. It opens you up to disappointment, to frustration, to things not working out the way you imagined. So instead, you adjusted. You became more neutral, more contained, more careful about what you allowed yourself to fully want. That wasn't weakness, that was self-protection. But now that same pattern is starting to feel limiting, because something is shifting and it's not asking you to stay in that safe, controlled space anymore. It's pushing you in the opposite direction. You might notice it in small moments at first. A thought that comes up about something you actually want, something specific, something bigger than what you've been allowing yourself to consider. And your first instinct is still to pull back, to downplay it, to say that's too much, or let's be realistic. But that pull doesn't go away as easily as it used to. And the more you try to reduce it, the more it stands out. You didn't lose your ambition, you just learned how to keep it quiet. That's what's changing now. Because the same control that once kept you stable is now starting to hold you back from moving forward in a meaningful way. With everything shifting this quickly, the real pressure isn't coming from what's happening around you. It's coming from how easy it is to lose your center while trying to keep up with it. When things don't hold their shape for long, your mind naturally tries to compensate. It starts analyzing more, questioning more, trying to stay ahead of what might change next. You replay conversations, rethink decisions, second-guess reactions, not because you're unsure of yourself, but because the environment itself isn't giving you anything stable to anchor to. That's where the overwhelm starts to build, not from one big problem, but from too many small shifts happening too close together. And the instinct is to chase clarity, to figure everything out, to lock things into place, to feel like you understand exactly where you stand at all times. But right now, that approach creates more tension than relief, because the more you try to mentally control every moving piece, the more unstable it feels. You don't feel overwhelmed because things are changing. You feel overwhelmed because you're trying to keep everything mentally organized while they do. That's the difference. This isn't a moment that rewards over-analysis, it rewards steadiness, not passivity, not ignoring what's happening, but the ability to stay internally level even when external situations aren't. Because when your mind starts reacting to every shift, every change feels bigger than it actually is. Small uncertainties turn into larger doubts. Temporary situations feel more permanent than they really are. And that's where people lose their footing. They don't get thrown off by one major event. They get pulled off balance by constant micro-adjustments that slowly wear down their sense of stability. So what matters right now isn't having all the answers. It's maintaining a state where you don't need them immediately. There's a very specific feeling that's been building for a lot of people, and it's easy to misread it if you're not paying attention. It's not sadness, it's not burnout, it's not even frustration in the usual sense. It's a quiet dissatisfaction that shows up even when things are objectively fine. You can be in a situation that used to feel good, something that once felt like progress, something you worked toward, and instead of feeling fulfilled, there's this subtle sense that something is missing. Not dramatically, not in a way that ruins the moment, but enough to notice that the feeling doesn't land the same anymore. That's what makes it confusing, because nothing is technically wrong, but something doesn't feel complete either. And the instinct is to question yourself, to think maybe you're being ungrateful or expecting too much or not appreciating what you have. But that's not what this is. You're not dissatisfied because things are lacking. You're dissatisfied because you've outgrown what used to satisfy you. That's a very different situation, because it means the issue isn't what you have. It's that your internal standard has shifted. What used to feel like enough doesn't hold the same weight anymore. The same experiences don't give the same sense of progress. The same outcomes don't create the same level of fulfillment. And it's not because they've gotten worse. It's because you've changed. Your expectations aren't just bigger. They're more specific, more refined, less willing to settle for things that are good enough, but not fully aligned. And that creates tension, because your current reality might still reflect what you used to want, not what you want now. The life that once felt like progress can start to feel like a limitation when your standards evolve. That's the uncomfortable part, because you can't unsee it once you notice it. You can't go back to feeling satisfied with something that no longer matches where you are internally, and trying to force that feeling only makes the disconnect more obvious. But this isn't a negative sign. It's not a sign that things are falling apart or that you're losing direction. It's actually the opposite. This kind of restlessness doesn't show up when things are collapsing. It shows up right before they expand. One of the most noticeable shifts right now isn't happening in your thoughts or your routine. It's happening in how people feel to be around. And it's not dramatic. There's no big argument, no clear breaking point, no obvious reason you can point to and say, that's why this feels different. It's quieter than that. More subtle, but also more accurate. You start noticing that some interactions feel lighter, more natural, almost effortless. Conversations flow, there's a sense of ease, and when it's over, you don't feel drained or second-guessing anything. You just move on, cleanly. Then there are other interactions that feel slightly heavier than they used to. Not toxic, Not unbearable, just off. Like something is taking more energy than it gives back. You might find yourself less interested in continuing certain conversations, less willing to explain yourself, less inclined to stay engaged longer than necessary. And the key difference right now is that you're not forcing yourself to override that feeling anymore. Before, you might have ignored it. You would have rationalized it, told yourself it's not a big deal, or pushed through out of habit. But now, the contrast is clearer, and it's harder to pretend you don't notice it. You're not suddenly becoming distant. You're just no longer comfortable staying where your energy quietly drains. That's what makes this period feel like a filter, not because you're actively cutting people off or making bold decisions about relationships, but because your natural response is changing. You're not reaching out the same way. You're not engaging as deeply in certain dynamics, and you're not forcing continuity where it doesn't feel natural anymore. At the same time, the opposite becomes just as obvious. There are people who feel easier to be around than before, conversations that feel more aligned, interactions that don't require effort to maintain, and you start gravitating toward that without overthinking it. It's not about labeling people as good or bad. It's about noticing what expands you and what slowly contracts you. The difference isn't in who people are. It's in how you feel after being around them. And that awareness becomes sharper right now because everything else is moving faster. You don't have the same patience for dynamics that don't feel right, not out of frustration, but because your attention is becoming more selective. For a while, a lot of people have been operating in a mode that doesn't get talked about enough. Not thriving, not fully progressing, but managing. Getting through things, handling responsibilities, maintaining stability, keeping everything in order, just enough to function without falling behind. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. It kept things steady, predictable, under control, and in certain phases, that's necessary. But something is shifting now where that mode doesn't feel as comfortable as it used to. It starts to feel limiting. You notice that simply maintaining things isn't enough anymore. Just getting through the day, just keeping things stable, just staying where you are, it doesn't carry the same sense of security it once did. Instead, there's a growing awareness that staying in that state is actually holding you in place. Coping keeps things from falling apart, but it doesn't move anything forward. That realization is what starts to create momentum. You don't necessarily have everything figured out, but there's a stronger pull to engage with things more directly. To make decisions you've been delaying, to act on things you've been thinking about but not committing to step into situations instead of observing them from a distance. And what's different now is that this doesn't feel forced. Before, taking action might have felt like pressure, like something you had to push yourself into. Now it feels more natural, almost like a response to the fact that standing still isn't as comfortable anymore. You start noticing that you're more willing to try, to initiate, to move things forward even if you don't have complete certainty. You don't need full clarity to move anymore, you just need enough conviction to start. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything, because once you move out of that coping mode, even slightly, you begin to see results faster. Not perfect results, not everything working instantly, but enough feedback to keep you engaged. And that creates a different kind of energy. You're no longer waiting for the right moment, the perfect plan, or the ideal conditions. You're interacting with your life in real time, adjusting as you go instead of holding back until everything feels guaranteed. That's where things start opening up again. Because movement creates options, action creates direction, and even small steps begin to break the feeling of being stuck in a loop of maintenance. The moment you stop just managing your life is the moment it starts responding to you again. And if you're still here, still watching, I genuinely appreciate you. And even if it feels fast, even if it feels unclear at times, there's something very real about this phase. Things are moving, things are rearranging, and more importantly, you're starting to respond to it differently. That matters. You don't need to rush to define it. You don't need to force clarity out of every moment. Just stay aware of what feels right, what feels off, and what's becoming harder to ignore. That's enough, because as things continue to shift, you'll find that you're not trying to keep up with life anymore. You're starting to move with it. And that's where things begin to open up in a completely different way.